Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has finally come out and addressed the growing unrest in Cuba, stating in no uncertain terms that it's America's fault. That's right. The people in Cuba are suffering because America won't trade them stuff. It is so deliciously communist to be like, it's not our fault we can't succeed. It's your fault because you've got stuff. You guys ever see that movie Elysium, where there's like a floating ring of all the rich people and they've got the wonderful technology you can just lay in, it cures all your diseases? This is actually how these people view the world, as if like America has every answer for all of these people. Listen, your country, it's your responsibility. You're not entitled to trade. AOC is basically saying that the embargo on Cuba is why they're suffering. No, if Cuba can't sustain itself, that's why it's suffering. If the Cuban government is a dictatorship and people can't be free to do their thing, that's why they are suffering. There is no obligation of the United States or anyone else to give anyone else anything. But these people live in the world where they believe your stuff is my stuff. So the people of Cuba should be able to just have access to our stuff. Look, I think the embargo is dumb for a lot of reasons, but that's not why Cuba's in trouble right now. Now, AOC is getting roasted by another Democrat, this time from Florida, because people in Florida don't like communism. Even many of the Democrats. I shouldn't say all, because there's probably a lot of young progressives who live there. But a lot of the people who moved to Florida or fled Cuba or have family who did, they ain't going to like Cuban communism. So even the Democrats in Florida, I think there's like one statewide Democrat. And I think that's her. But let's read the story. AOC's Cuba tweet draws fiery response from Florida Dem. We also must name the U.S. contribution to Cuban suffering, our 60-year-old embargo. That's right. It's our fault that they're communists. They say Rep. AOC on Thursday ran into opposition from a prominent Florida Democrat after she called for the U.S. to end its embargo on Cuba, underlining divisions within the party on how to respond to the communist country's recent upheaval. I will say, there's issues with the embargo I think are dumb, and I should probably elaborate a little bit. People just go there anyway. When I lived in Florida, I had a bunch of people there tell me that like Americans hop on boats and they go to Cuba and they, act like normal. I don't know too much about what they actually do, so maybe it's still within the lines of the embargo. But it seems to be that I suppose it's a greater level pressure. There's problems with it, to put it mildly. But I do think there's an issue with, it might make sense in some capacity not to trade with people who are communist dictators, who are abusing their people and things like that. So I'll just put it this way. It's a tough circumstance, but it's not our responsibility. Quote, we also must name the U.S. contribution to Cuban suffering, our 60-year-old embargo. AOC tweeted, I outright reject the Biden administration's defense of the embargo. It is never acceptable for us to use cruelty as a point of leverage against everyday people. I love this so much that, like, imagine you're sitting on your porch sipping a tall glass of lemonade and that glass is sweating with condensation and you're rocking back and forth, fanning yourself. And a guy walks up and says, can I have that lemonade? And you go, no, I don't think you can. Would you trade it with me? No, I don't think I will. This is cruelty. You are causing my suffering by not giving me your stuff. Or you can just be like, go away, we're not giving you stuff. Communists, man. This is a matter of national... So former Florida Congresswoman Debbie Mucarsel-Powell publicly chastised the New York Congresswoman on Twitter, pointing to failed policies of the communist regime that has violated human rights, imprisoned and killed dissidents. I mean, that actually might be a good reason not to engage in trade with that country. This is a matter of national security. The U.S. must act. Mucarsel-Powell tweeted, the starkly differing positions exemplify a split between progressive and moderate Democrats on the Cuban embargo. AOC has risen to prominence in the House as part of a progressive coalition. Mucarsel-Powell, who has been advising Nancy Pelosi on Cuba policy, was ousted from her heavily Latino South Florida district in 2020 when Hispanic voters broke hard for Republicans as they pounded Democrats for being socialists. When Miami Democrats ran from the term, Ocasio-Cortez has aligned with Democratic socialists. The Democratic Socialists have publicly supported the communist regime. Black Lives Matter has publicly supported the communist regime. Ocasio-Cortez is publicly supporting the communist. Oh, okay. She's apologizing for the communist regime. They go on to mention Cubans took to the streets in historic protests and demonstrations against the 6-decade-old regime the past week, leading to hundreds of arrests. Joe Biden has been slow to react. Meanwhile, Florida Democrats see an opportunity for Biden to help bring democracy to Cuba. That's right. That's what we'll call it. I'm not a fan. I don't think there's going to be an appropriate way to intervene with Cuba. I don't mind sanctions, sort of. Sanctions stop a country from trading with other people. The embargo is the U.S. being like, yo, we're not going to trade with you. I like that. Look, man, if you do crazy crackpot stuff and you're like evil, then I'm not going to trade with you. We have no reason to. The United States has resources. We have allies around the world, and we don't need to be dealing with Cuba. Now, it is funny that we have Guantanamo Bay, which creates a whole other issue, I guess, but we don't need to be trading with people who do this kind of stuff. Now, Joe Biden actually wants to intervene. I think this is a bad idea no matter what. However, Biden isn't talking about military intervention. He's talking about technological intervention. So this might get interesting. There's a fine line between starting a war and invading a country, strike forces, airstrikes or whatever. We had the mayor of Miami say, we got to have airstrikes on the table. Joe Biden's talking about communications technology. That might be a good idea, actually. I mean, of course, the country will still consider it to be an act of war. But enabling communications, I don't have that big of a problem with. In fact, there are many activist groups, people that I've known for a long time, who do just that. They dial in phone lines into countries that are trying to shut down the internet. And this was 10 years ago they were doing this stuff. I don't know if they're still doing it. But they would provide dial-up internet lines so people could send word and send images and videos, tell people what was going on in their countries during this unrest. Well, Joe Biden wants to get involved. Biden is considering U.S. intervention in Cuba as anti-government protests spread. The U.S. is exploring whether it has the technology to assist protesters in Cuba suffering from blackouts orchestrated by the government, Biden said Thursday, among other options. They say the U.S. is weighing intervention. This is likely due to internet. Quote, they've cut off access to the internet, Biden said at the White House Thursday afternoon in a press conference alongside German Chancellor Angela Merkel. We're considering whether we have the technology to reinstate that access. How would you do that? Because I've seen a lot of people say we should get internet to the people of Cuba. And I'm like, OK, I like the idea. If the communist regime has nothing to hide and the people really support them, then let the people speak. Right. I wonder why they would shut the internet down. Probably because they're communist authoritarians and nobody likes them. Anyway, do we have the actual technology to get the internet out for them? Most of these people probably have cable or some kind of wireless or Wi-Fi or dial-up internet. If it's wired internet, we can't just dial into it. I don't know how we would do this other than some kind of satellite, but then the people need some kind of satellite receiver. We could theoretically, you know what? I'll be honest. The U.S. definitely has the ability to jam up Cuban cell towers, bring out mobile cell towers with massive range, and actually start implementing communications for that for this region. But I don't know if the Cuban government would just be okay with that. They say widespread internet blackouts across the Caribbean island appear to have been enacted by the government and follow surprisingly diverse protests in Cuban cities. Individuals and families from a variety of backgrounds, in addition to journalists and activists, are gathering to speak out against acute shortages of supplies needed to address the most pernicious effects of the ongoing pandemic. Reports have emerged that Cubans have had to line up for blocks to purchase whatever they can find at stores. And outrage has been magnified by inflation, as well as the blackouts amid tropical summer heat. It has destroyed me. Raisa Amelia Gonzalez Cantillo, the mother of a jailed artist and dissident, told the Washington Post on Wednesday. We don't even have internet to tell the world what's happening. Biden on Thursday described Cuba as a failed state that is repressing their citizens. His comments represent a break from his former boss, Obama, who prioritized repairing relations with Cuba among his Western Hemisphere policies. Now, look, I don't know if intervention is the right idea. I can say credit where credit is due, Joe Biden. Cuba is awful. The communists are awful, and we need to call it out. Quote, there are a number of things we are considering doing to help the people of Cuba, but that would require a different circumstance or a guarantee that they would not be taken advantage of by the government. Biden added. He offered as an example the cash remittances that Cuban Americans could send to family on the island. The U.S. does not currently permit those due to concerns that government would confiscate them for its own purposes. And yeah, it probably would. Biden said the U.S. also does not have plans to ship vaccines for COVID to Cuba until an international aid organization can ensure average citizens would have access to them. Biden's comments come as he faces increased domestic political pressure, particularly in key states like Florida, to do more to help the people of the ailing island. Where is Biden? Chants broke out at a protest in Tampa this week. You know, I gotta be honest. Biden is screwed. The Democrats are screwed. The Republicans don't do all that much, but at the very least, Republicans are mostly unified. At least they have Trump, a charismatic leader, or charismatic enough. Joe Biden is trying to contend with Democrats like AOC, who blame America, and Democrats in Florida who blame communism. How will you ever win Florida? These midterms are going to be spicy. Okay. You had a safe Democrat district in Miami. Safe Democrat. They were like, this thing's going to go 20 points Democrat. It flipped Republican. Nobody saw that coming. Not even the Republicans. But they did it. Why? Democrats in Florida, sure, they may say things like, I actually agree with certain left-wing policy and I'm not particularly religious or anything like that, but they don't like communism. And as more and more of the Hispanic community, many of those with ties to Venezuela or Cuba or, Nicaragua, some of these other countries, the more they see what they saw in their own country happening here, the more likely they're going to vote against it no matter what. Now think about what happens. Florida was a narrow, very, very close race between you had DeSantis, you had Gillum, then you have the Senate race. It's very close, well, relatively close, relatively. I think 2022 we might see many, many more safe blue areas turn Republican. Now, I don't know for sure. A lot can change. Right now, it may not matter. What we're seeing right now may as well be 1,000 years away, the election. Because what really matters is that week right before the election happens. Look, going up to the election, the months, they matter, but it really hyper concentrates in that final week. If something happens, something changes. But Joe Biden's in trouble. The people in California are not going to support the Democrats in Florida. Democrats, even in the U.S., are in complete disarray. So if Joe Biden comes out and says, come on, man, communism's bad. Yeah, Cuba. What's going to happen? Progressives are going to revolt. AOC, Black Lives Matter, with nearly 5 million followers, came out and defended the communist regime. The DSA tweeted in support of the communists. And the crazy thing is, these people are so dumb that they're like, it's America's fault. It's America's fault that we don't give our stuff away to other people. Think about how moronic that is. It's like I said with the lemonade analogy. You're walking down the street and a guy says, give me your shirt. And you're like, I will not do that. I'll trade you for it. I'm not giving my shirt. You are causing me suffering. Sound familiar? You guys see that video of the woman who's being filmed in the store and then she starts screaming and she falls to the ground and she's rolling around on the ground? It's insane. She's like it's like a women's clothing store or something. And she's screaming and on the ground, just rolling. I'm like, that's millennials. This is what happens when you raise a generation to be entitled. To be entitled. They become communists. They become socialists. And what ends up happening is they say, you need to give me stuff. That's why I'm suffering. That's really the mentality they have. Maybe that is the core at which divides the factions in the culture war. That is the singular issue. That someone like me, I say, you know what? Leave me alone. And the other person says, give me your stuff. That's it. That's really what it comes down to. AOC is like, we should be able to take stuff and then give people stuff. I want your stuff. Give me your stuff. And I'm kind of like, leave me alone and let me do my thing. Even if you're so on the libertarian spectrum, that's basically it. Anybody who is not in that space, they ain't libertarian. Okay. You can be libertarian-ish. And I don't mean big L libertarian. I mean, like, you've got the authoritarian spectrum. You got the libertarian spectrum. Where I'm at is, you know what? Disagree with Ron Paul on a lot of ideological issues, but he's Dr. No. And if he became president and said, I'm going to leave you alone, I'd be like, thank you, Dr. Paul. And I'd go do my thing. That's why I like the Pauls, the Paul family. Now, I want to be left alone. I want to go to the middle of nowhere, have my little hippie commune, have some chickens, grow vegetables, and not have some dumb communist show up at my house and say, the reason everyone is suffering is because you grew vegetables you didn't give to us. That's the mentality of these people. Think about how it works on scale, and then you'll really understand. You got a backyard? Maybe you got a backyard. Let's say you go in your backyard and you take out some tomato seeds and you put them in the ground and you go, ooh, this is going to be fun. And you water them every day and then tomatoes grow. And you're like, excellent. Now I have tomatoes for my family. And then your neighbor says, I'm suffering. Give me your tomatoes. And you say, I'm not going to give you my tomatoes. And they say, well, I'll trade you for them. I am not going to trade my tomatoes. You are causing me suffering. That's what these people think. Dude, plant your own vegetables. Well, tomatoes are fruits, but I digress. Bloomberg reports, desperate Cubans brave sea to flee COVID and islands unrest. Oh, they're fleeing COVID, is it, Bloomberg? I love the sheer absurdity that is the modern condition. All of these media outlets saying COVID is the real problem. Bloomberg, come on, man. On July 6th, as Hurricane Elsa roared towards Florida, 5 Cuban men on a rickety wooden boat went ashore about 18 miles north of Miami. After days at sea, some of the refugees clapped in relief as they disembarked. Hours later, the U.S. Coast Guard was rushing to save another Cuban group. This we understand. The sudden surge in balseros, or rafters, setting sail for South Florida, like the spontaneous protest that broke out in Havana, is a sign that living conditions on the communist island are rapidly deteriorating 16 months into the pandemic. An untamed COVID outbreak is racing through the island, deepening an economic crisis that began when the regime's longtime benefactor, Venezuela, ended its financial support following the 2014 oil price collapse. I don't care to play any stupid games about blaming COVID for why people are fleeing Cuba, because people have been fleeing Cuba for a long time. And of course, Cuba is no longer getting financial support from Venezuela. The end is nigh for the socialists and the communists. But I'll tell you this. I am absolutely 100% in favor of allowing the Cuban people who are fleeing that country to come here as refugees and settle where they please. It probably would make sense to have them settle in strategically located areas, like not just have them all end up in Florida. But I'm in favor of it. I'm in favor of refugees and asylum seekers coming to the southern border, so long as they're actually refugees and asylum seekers. You see, there's the issue. For people in Cuba, your closest destination for safety, Florida. You get in a boat, you can go. I think, what is it, a couple hours by boat if you're on a speedboat or something? That's what someone told me. I think it's like 2 hours, is it? Maybe? I don't know. Anyway, if you're in Cuba and you're like, help, we're being repressed. I know, let's flee and seek refuge. And so you flee to Florida, one of the closest countries, the closest places for you to go. Makes sense to me. If we send you back, they'll kill you. Okay, we're going to figure something out. Then you have the southern border. Now, here's the problem. They come from Honduras. They go through all these different countries. They go through, Mexico, and they get here. And then they're like, we could stay in Mexico. And Mexico is awesome, by the way. Legit, super awesome. And they're like, no, but we want to come here. And I'm like, bro, that's not legit. You're not fleeing something. You're trying to get somewhere else. You know what I mean? People who want to come to America, I get it. And it does kind of suck, because you can be like, man, if only I was in Cuba, then I could come to America. Well, the people in Cuba have little option. And Mexico City is beautiful. It is wealthy. They got Buffalo Wild Wings. Why pass that up and then try and come to the southern U.S. border? So here's the problem. Right now, the Democrats are saying they won't accept these refugees from Cuba, which is the most insane thing I've ever heard. It's literally right there. Cuba. Nope, we're going to turn you away and send you to a different country. When Donald Trump said the people at the southern border coming in would be told to wait in Mexico, they said that Trump was a racist and a bigot and was calling Mexicans all these awful names. Trump didn't even say we're going to reject you outright. He said we're going to have you wait in Mexico while we process your asylum, your paperwork. And the left said that was wrong. And Joe Biden ended that policy. So this is ultimately what it comes down to. The Democratic Party is in a psychotic position. Joe Biden simultaneously allowing people to come to the southern border while his administration won't allow Cubans to come here, when that actually makes sense, because nothing they do makes sense. AOC is praising the communists while Joe Biden is blaming the communists. The Democratic Party is in chaos. Sorry. The progressives that are trying to take over are nuts, are entitled. And I'll tell you this, man, it used to be Democrats and Republicans. Soon it's going to be the workers and the thieves. What I mean by that is the Democratic Party is increasingly becoming the party of you should give me your stuff. And so you're going to have people on the Republican side saying we're working class and we want to have a factory. And they're going to be like, give me your stuff. That's communism. People who don't want to work and want to use the monopoly of government violence to take from you. And therein lies the big problem of authoritarian government at any rate. The federal government needs to be weaker, substantially weaker. And I think it's getting weaker in a lot of ways. It's hard to know for sure. In some areas, it seems to be getting stronger. In some areas, less and less states are actually paying attention to what the federal government wants. But the federal government should be extremely weak. The states should be the little experiments of democracy like they're supposed to be, and the federal government should back off. The problem is many Democrats who are socialists and communists don't want to do work, don't understand how work works, and want to take your stuff because they're like, if this guy's got $10, he can give that $5 to somebody else. I love the stupidity of, if we have all these billionaires, why don't they just solve world hunger? Let me ask you a question, socialists. If Jeff Bezos liquidated some of his stock into cash to trade, and let's just say the stock price didn't take a hit that bad, and then he said, okay, now I'm going to shift this into major food production and purchasing to feed the hungry. He provides meals to all of these poor, hungry people in these third world countries. What happens? What happens next? Serious question. Do you have an answer? Because I can tell you, because we've done this. We and many other countries have tried to end hunger. There's a problem with it. First, the people become dependent. You already have people who can't sustain themselves in whatever region they're in. In some instances, there's no food because they can't grow it. So we give them food. Then they eat it and say, we need more food. Often, depending on how much food we give, they then have more family. They have children and now require even more food. And so we're like, okay, so this isn't actually solving the problem. It's actually making it worse. We don't want people starving or suffering, but just giving food doesn't solve anything. Why? Because if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. But if you teach a man a fish, you feed him for the rest of his life, which is why we've shifted to providing tablets and education to these areas so they can learn how to make self-sustaining agriculture, build buildings, and generally improve their lives. The left doesn't get this, though. They want immediate satisfaction. They're entitled. Just give me the food. Why are you throwing away all that food? That's a good point. We shouldn't make it. We shouldn't waste it. But we can't just walk up to someone and dump a pile of food at their feet and say, have a nice day. It doesn't work. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.